Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It is Professor Hamamoto, and the date is June 8, 2025. The time 4 p.m. PDT. Welcome, one and all. Today, I have prepared for you what I believe is a important talk because it's a building block for an area of inquiry that might yield some practical results in the area of the generalized psychopathy that we're witnessing in 2025. So, toward that end, I gave this talk a somewhat ironic title of Everyday Psychopathy for Fun and Profit, because even as it threatens to overwhelm us and overrun the society, the political system, and the economic structure that is psychopathy, at the same time, there's a large industry that profits from it, ranging from big pharma all the way to the pop-up pundits on TubeView. And every Tom, Dick, and Harry who has gone into the true crime business, right? Some of them are quite good. I read a lot of their work, good, bad, and ugly. And it's clear from most of the viewers here which ones I dismiss and the ones that I respect. So today we're going to be focusing on two major personalities in the development, the refinement of this idea of it's today it's called dissociative identity disorder, DID. Back in the days of Dr. Hervey Cleckley, it was called psychopathy, right? And I'm referring to this classic book. Many of you have read this. It should be in your library. I wouldn't necessarily get this edition because it misspells his name. It's a reprint. It's in the public domain. So you have all kinds of people seeing that there's buyers for this type of product are putting it out to market. And this, of course, is the Edvard Munch painting The Scream. And that mask should be quite familiar to those of you who are familiar with the Scream movies, which I haven't seen myself, but I will. I'm going to do a long extended session for myself watching Scream 1, 2, and 3 from the beginning, because that's a film that keeps cropping up in the literature, not the academic literature, but in the anecdotal information among the psychopathic subculture. Yes, there is a psychopathic subculture. It has become so normalized that I think it's safe to call it a not necessarily a mental illness anymore, because psychiatry over the past 50 years has been normalizing deviance and weirdness and strangeness and perversity. And it all comes out of the academic institution. These are medical research institutions attached to universities, and the people in the sociology department, especially today, currently, it's coming out of gender and women's studies, queer studies in particular, in 2025. It's been going in that direction for many, many years. So you can see just by my introduction here that this topic here that goes back way back to 1941, when this book was first published, has gone through about 5 or 6 editions by now. It's never been out of print. This whole idea of psychopathy has transformed itself into something quite significant as an industry, as a means of governance, of centralized political control, right? It's not just a mental illness anymore. It's what I call an epistemology, an episteme, if you will. I won't unpack these terms, but for those of you who've studied your postmodern, post-structuralist theory, you'll know what I'm implying, right? By the way, some of these post-structuralist thinkers like Foucault, who I've mentioned more than once, many, many times over the past 4.5 years, Michel Foucault, he's one of the people who's responsible for normalizing psychopathy, right? Him and people like Georges Bataille. And I think trying to trace it back, the intellectual heritage of people like Michel Foucault. And I think it comes out of the Rosicrucians. I think it goes back to the sodomites that were affiliated with the earlier late medieval secret societies, some of which have become cliches by now, like the Knights Templar, right? You know the old story, Jacques de Molay, you will be avenged. You know that whole story. Now it's just folklore, thanks to the pop-up pundits. I'm saying let's retain the historical importance of all this scholarship that has now become part of the pop culture. And that's part of the strategy. That's why we're inundated to the point where, oh, you see something in a title on TubeView that says psychopathy, right? You, not you who are watching, but the average browser is going to think, oh, yeah, I know all about it. Yeah, I understand. I understand goth, right? I live it. I was a goth back in the 80s and on and on. Okay, so the Mask of Sanity, we're going to go through. That's part one. And we're going to do a response to the Mask of Sanity with a book by Dr. Cleckley, by the way, was a medical doctor, MD, from the University of Georgia. I guess back then it was College of Georgia School of Medicine. And another medical doctor, he's Canadian nationality, Colin A. Ross. Many of you already know his work. Congratulations. I think it's important. And I think it's equally important to revisit his work right now rather than it just being absorbed and passed over by all these people who are now snap experts on psychopathy or DID. If you want to look on TubeView, there's nothing, there's tons of material on the topic, right? That tells me that's being overdone. So I want to recapture the truly incisive import of people's contributions, such as Dr. Cleckley, because overall I respect him as a physician, as a humanist, as an intellectual, as a researcher, as a scholar. And I think he represents all that medical knowledge should be, or what. Maybe it was like that back in the 1940s when he came up, before big pharma took it over and the corporations took over medicine, when there were still these family doctors. He comes from a family of such people that would travel miles and miles in a horse and buggy to tend to their patients who were poor as dirt. All they could do was give them a can of spam or corned beef or give them a sack of potato. They didn't have no money. We're talking about rural Georgia down south. This is most America. This is the old-fashioned, old school medicine that's long gone. And we should return to the spirit of it, because there's a lot of good medicine that is insights and practices that have been developed in the intervening decades. We don't want to throw that overboard. But the culture of care has been taken over by the corporatist mentality and Babylonian science. So we're going to look at this book as part two. It's called The Control of Eve, subtitled The True Story Behind the Three Faces of Eve. Now, those of you who are of my generation who grew up on television, we were babysat by TV. I fully admit it. I made it part of my career to study and examine television as a media of communication, right? Most of you know my background, so I won't go through that again. But if you were back in the 50s and up through the 60s, when local television stations and networks television still ruled the airwaves, this is before cable, in other words, every once in a while, you get in your local TV guide. We never subscribed to TV guide. We just got the supplement that was delivered to the households via the daily newspaper, right? The LA Times or the Orange County Register, the Anaheim Bulletin, whatever it was. There was a TV supplement there. But in that supplement, periodically would be this film, The Three Faces of Eve. So I've seen it multiple times, and so have you of a certain generation. For those of you who missed out, I recommend for you to rent or to purchase the DVD and watch The Three Faces of Eve, starring, she's one of the great actresses in the English-speaking world, Joanne Woodward, right? She was a real actress, all right? I don't know if she has a sort of a scandalous past like most of these characters with no talent today seem to possess. But she came through theater. And by the way, she comes from the South too, which was one of the reasons why she was hired for the job. It was a very challenging acting role, playing these multiple personalities. In this case, for the sake of simplicity, the director and the writer of the film, Nunnally Johnson, the veteran Los Angeles filmmaker, Los Angeles based, not British, American, he reduced it to 3 characters because indeed the person it was based on, her name was Chris Costner Sizemore, experienced multiple personalities, and Dr. Colin Ross catalogs them in this book. This book is not without its flaws, by the way, which I'll get to in a moment, both of omission and of commission. No book is perfect, but so far as the psychiatric literature is concerned, I think Colin Ross is very much leading the way into enlightening the general public, number one, about the abuses of psychiatry. I don't know, and he's skeptical of it himself. I don't know if he's going to have an impact on the profession of psychiatry. It's too caught up into the corporatist framework to be let loose. It is the science of the oligarchs, right? And they're not going to let it go. They've killed off Judaism. They've killed off Christianity. They've almost killed off Islam. I'm talking about the Orthodox strains of it. And Catholicism, don't get me started. All right. You know what I'm saying? We've become a secular society. And that process has been completed by the psychiatric God that we are now forced to worship. And it's a self-funding mechanism because the pharmaceutical industry has a monopoly on these drugs ranging from hallucinogens, so-called antidepressants. That's another talk altogether. So anyway, I have the highest regard for Dr. Colin Ross, who, by the way, also wrote a seminal text on the CIA doctors, right? Who are the CIA doctors? We all know about them by now, thanks to Colin Ross. He's one of the most plagiarized original thinkers and writers and researchers out there. All the pop-up pundits that you watch regularly on TubeView and read about, who seem to have a total mastery of the literature, but actually they're getting it from Grok and Chat GPT, but they happen to speak 120 beats per minute. They're really slick talkers because that's how stage hypnotism works. You have to have the patter, it's called. It's the sales patter. And I'm telling you this because you're going to see show up later on as a bot saying, oh, why don't you just get to the topic? Could you just speed it up a little bit? Those are bots meant to drive my viewers that belong to me to these fast talking snake oil salesmen on TubeView who've plagiarized people like Colin Ross, who wrote all about the CIA mind control programs. Not long after In Search of the Manchurian Candidate. And then we're now glutted with all this information. I call it the Annie Jacobson phenomenon or syndrome. We have all this information that was always denied. Oh, those are just a bunch of crackpot conspiracy theories. Once all the information has been so widespread and it's out, then the publishing industry, which is intelligence industry, hire someone like your Annie Jacobson or a Whitney Webb to say, oh yeah, we know all about this all along. Yeah, this is how it really is. But these are people who've been compiling this information about from people like Colin Ross, the CIA doctors. I didn't put it in the link below, but that belongs in your library. Right, another book you might want to look at. It's related to this topic by the end because it's a third part. Right, we're going to talk about Dr. Cleckley and his mask of sanity. We're going to talk about Colin Ross and the three faces of Eve and the abuse of this one patient with DID, multiple personality, by these medical doctors, including Hervey Cleckley. That's why I'm mentioning it. And part 3 is going to be dealing with the psychopathy that's become normalized. And toward the end, and I should tell you now before you tune out, because I'm talking too slow or I'm not getting to the topic quickly enough for Mr. Bots. Because I looked them up and it says subscribers 1 or 0. These are bots because the casual viewer that comes into the comments is going to look and they're going to see that comment, oh, it's too slow. So people are not going to watch this show. This is part of the suppression tactic that's used. Shadow banning, you know about. The other one is to put these comments on, well, this guy's not a very good communicator. Or he's too obscure. He doesn't get to the point. He's angry. He's mad. He's crazy. He's yellow, too. We don't like to see yellow people with ideas. We want to see Mr. Miyagi. All right. So just to let you know, you need to subscribe. I'd appreciate your support on Patreon because all these talks that I've been doing for the past few weeks, including this one, is going to lead to a hypothesis that I've been working on now. These are not one-offs that I'm doing here. This is meant to set the foundation for a hypothesis that could might be put to use in solving one of the most incredible contemporary crimes taking place right as we speak. And you know it as the smiley face killers. So by next week, I'll be talking about this book by William Ramsey. He's a very good journalist. He's a good researcher. And I'll leave that for next week. If you want to read ahead, buy the book, go ahead and do that. He has another volume, Global Death Cult, William Ramsey. Might want to check that out. I'm finding both of these volumes very healthy, in addition to his previous books, which I'm familiar with, especially the ones on Aleister Crowley. Oh, you hear the phrase, the name Aleister Crowley, and all the newbies think you know everything about it because you saw it on the Joe Rogan show. That's part of the strategy. But Ramsey, amongst others, but he's one of the new wave of commentators who take the Crowleyan legacy seriously instead of transforming it in just to a lot of pop dross, right? Just a lot of pop culture crap that you see on TubeView. So he's done a book on Aleister Crowley, and I think puts together a convincing argument regarding the continuing influence of Crowley on all these different death and disease and deviance cults that have been normalized, first in the university, then through regulatory, through agencies in the government, because those people came out of the university, right? The administrators, they got their law degrees there, and this literature has also infiltrated legal scholarship, the scholarship of the law schools. I know, I read this stuff. It's not just in women and gender studies, not just in sociology and history. You would expect that stuff, but it's also in the Yale Law Review, Harvard, you name it. How do I know this? I spent most of this week reading all these turgidly written academic articles, some of them law review articles about bondage, discipline, sadomasochism, childhood sexual abuse, dissociation. And a lot of these are affirming BDSM. We're becoming a BDSM mainstream culture. You don't think these people walking around in gimp masks on the street are just part of Gay Pride Day? They want to make this into the dominant American and world culture, sponsored directly by the usual suspects, the people with endless coffers of monies and influence that can take society and culture in any direction they choose to, or at least they hope to. I don't think that control is complete yet. And that's why casts like this, talks like this are so important, even though there's so few people watching it, because some of you might be mentioning it to other people. You might start expanding your own awareness of Transvestite Story Hour, right? That the people in alt-right media have so much fun making fun of, mocking it. They think it's just a passing fancy, right? They think, oh, women in the boys' bathroom. Okay, we've got that one taken care of. No, ladies and gentlemen, they're just trolling the public. And most of your alt-right media, all the way from the Alex Jones show through Tucker Carlson, whoever else down the food chain, they're very easily trolled, and they take along us sheeple with them so we can share their outrage and have a snicker or two amongst ourselves, and we'll knowingly acknowledge, oh yeah, we're smarter than that. Look at those people dressed up in leather bondage outfits. And all the while, the agenda is being implemented slowly but surely. And this is, Breitbart is always saying, oh yeah, culture is upstream from politics. He was wrong. Intellectual work is upstream from culture, and culture is upstream from politics. I read the intellectual work to get an insight on where we're being guided by the Illuminati, by the descendants of the Templar bankers, by the bloodlines. These people are intellectuals. They spend a lot of time studying. They're ultra literate and cosmopolitan. That's the secret to their power. They're exploring areas of literature going back to Babylon. and they master the dead languages in order to tap into the secrets of population control that are millennia old. And what worked back then in Babylon is working like magic in the 21st century. All right. So thank you very much for joining me today and going along on this journey together. We're on this trip together because I'm learning as we're going along as well. And together we're going to solve these so-called smiley face killers by understanding the cultural forensics that gave rise to these atrocities that are culling the best and the brightest young men, primarily, that America, Britain, Spain, and France has to offer. It's mostly in the US, but it's also showing up in Canada. It's also showing up in European countries. And they fit the same profile. These are the most productive, intelligent, physically fit human specimens that are walking around. They represent a very small segment of the human population, and they're currently being culled. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself, but this is why you need to subscribe to this channel so you won't miss these subsequent talks. All right. I'm not just content to catalog all the different young men that have been killed and shown up in rivers or in lakes or in streams, their bodies missing for a week or more, walking out of bars in college towns, seemingly having been drugged. I'm not just going to report on it. I want to understand why. I answer on this channel, or I attempt to, on this channel, the why questions, not the what questions. The journalists talk about who, where, and how, and what, but they don't get into the explanations, the why. That to me is the whole purpose of inquiry on this level, not the journalistic level, not the YouTube level, is that plus sensationalism. Why? How? What are really the forensics behind this global death cult? And I'm getting to a closer idea, and I'm going to take you along with me on this voyage further. All right, so that's my sales pitch so far as subscriptions are concerned. So over the past several years, going on, I'm on the 5th year now, I've been talking about mental health, the mental health mafia. Big pharma is part of it. They're behind it. These are corporations. These are run by BlackRock, Blackstone, Vanguard, State Street, right? So-called private equity companies. That whole private equity system needs to be looked at. Excuse me. It needs to be looked at by the SEC, which itself is a captured federal agency. So at least they should make believe that they're going to control the corporatists, just like the FBI is pretending to control corporate and political crime with Kashyap Patel at the realm. You know, it's a bad sign when they put an Asian person in one of these top agencies. It's a signal that agency is set up to fail. They always let the Asian man or woman take the fall, just like the head of the Democratic Party, Democratic National Party, Lindy Lee. She's going around talking about how these people are all crazy and I'm no longer. Oh God, you you're a sucker. You're ambitious. You're an opportunist, just like a lot of these other yellows and the browns amongst the so-called Oriental peoples, including Kashpayut Patel and his sidekick Dan Bongino. Right. So that's the SEC. Right. I don't know if RFK Jr. is going to go sideways on us or not, but we're all watching closely. So far, he's doing a good job. So, I've been talking about the so-called mental health industry for a long time. You know my story of battling this takeover, this guy named Stan Su and his sidekick, Nolan Zane. These are two yellow men. They're both Chinese American, Cantonese speakers, right? Who stocked the department full of other Cantonese speaking Chinese Americans to take over Asian American Studies, my department at the University of California, Davis, so they can put all the yellow people into the mental health industry. And amongst all the groups in the United States of America society, it's your yellow people that have the lowest rate of participation in the so-called mental health field. So they aim to change that, right? Just like the black bourgeoisie sell out the average black man and woman, you got the yellow bourgeois, and it's the same. All you take the different groups. You've got Mexican, Latinos, and Latinx right now who are already gearing up to exploit the LA riots of 2025. You're going to see a Whitino female or male are going to say, yeah, my name is Fernandez, but they look like Anglos anyway, and I'm down with La Raza, and this is what we need. These are the resources we need in order to make my people free. And of course, they have nothing to do with civil rights movement or La Raza of the 1960s or the Chicano movement, right? It's all about the incorporation, the reconquista of Estados Unidos de America into the larger Holy Roman Empire, right? By the way, I don't say this out of animus, because unlike most of these right-wing commentators who say, deport them, send them back to Mexico, go ahead and fly La Bandera Mexicana back in your own country, get out of here, deport all of them. Unlike those people, I've been to Mexico many times. I've never lived there for any length of time, but I've visited multiple times. And guess what? I like it. I like the people. I like everything about it. The problem, the reason why you have 800,000 Mexicanos, Chinitos, Filipinos, and other groups is not just Latinos and Guatemalans and Salvadoreñas in Los Angeles. The reason why you have 800,000 of those in a city of less than 4 million, because that's part of the Holy Roman Empire recipe. How do you think the Philippines was conquered under the name of Prince Felipe? Well, I think it's called the Philippines. That's what they did. They Catholicized the country with a heavy dose of Freemasonry, as I've told you before. All the Ilustrados who created the nation of the Philippines is supposed to be a republic based after General MacArthur, and the United States is a Freemasons country and Roman Catholic. That's the direction we're heading. We might be past the tipping point. I don't know. It depends on how the riots are managed over the next few days. And by the way, all these riots are orchestrated out of the university. All the organizers who come on campus and recruit out of the classroom. I know, because they would come to my classroom. They'd come up to me and say, I'd like to take a few minutes before your lecture and make a pitch for La Raza or the trade union or whatever it is. But they're organizers. They want to get these impressionable 18, 19-year-olds fill them with a sense of purpose and throw them out there on the front lines of Los Angeles to be gassed or blinded by quote unquote less than lethal weapons. While they live in the West Side, Pacific Palisades, drawing a six-figure income as union stewards. That's what those dumbasses are. That's what they're working for. So I speak from experience. I like Mexico. I like Mexicanos. I have no problem with them, but my problem was this larger incorporation of the United States of America to the new Holy Roman Empire 2.0, which will have a technocratic control mechanism, which is going to be very much related to developments in AI, space travel, underground cities, all of that. All right, that's another talk, but I'm just trying to give you a larger panoramic scope of what we're dealing with. We're not just talking about Dr. Cleckley and Colin Ross and psychopathy, right? That's just an entree to the end game that I foresee, unless we intervene at the level of this type of counterintelligence. So I've been into the whole anti-psychiatry bag ever since I was an undergraduate. This is back in the 70s. I had a professor of political science. His name was Professor Mandelman, who gave me a reading list. This is outside the classroom. He said, okay, you got to read this, 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 and this. And one of the books, well, he used to talk about R.D. Laing a lot in class. So I got into R.D. Laing, thanks to Professor Mandelman, and realized that there were psychiatrists who were against the psychiatric establishment. And by the way, that's Colin Ross. He's an outsider in this hegemonic institution that runs the New World Order. They're run by psychiatric specialists. So I've been into, if you want to check them out on your own, it's spelled Laing. He's Scottish by nationality, R.D. Laing. He was very popular in the late 60s and 70s, but we seem to have forgotten. We've let the psychiatric establishment wrest control. If you want to read someone more recent, I would recommend Peter Breggin, Breggin. I should warn you, though, he does seem to be committed to electroconvulsive therapy, ECT. And that's alarming. He's against big pharma, but is he suggesting ECT is any better? I have my doubts. And by the way, these characters back in the 40s were starting to get into ECT and lobotomies. They're experimenting with it on a localized level, but they plan to make it a global therapy. It's all about to control the neurological system. And you've heard me more than once talking about the so-called neurosciences, which is now taking over from what Cleckley was doing and what Colin Ross is warning about. I would like to see Dr. Colin Ross do a book, he's written several now, on the emerging neurosciences and what it's going to do to psychiatry, because he might be critiquing a system that's dead, that's already been replaced by optogenetics or Neuralink or more exotic technologies that are now coming to the fore. The type of innovations that people like Jeffrey Epstein, right, and other intelligence, they're still around, all of them, not just him. By the way, did you hear the rumor that he's in a witness protection program? He being Jeffrey Epstein. I'm going to check that out. But he's not the only one. These are intelligence assets of foreign powers and within our own military. And they're not all Chacoms, by the way. They all don't look like a bunch of chinitos. By the way, you go to Mexico and they're about as racist as any other people in the world, right? They like to boast of themselves as the cultura of three races: the European, the indigenous, and the mestizo. But there's one race that they don't celebrate, and that's the chinito. That's the asiático. So I go to Mexico and I'm scum, but I'm used to it because I got that kind of I wouldn't say it's universal, but in certain circumstances, I know I grew up in that type of environment. All right, let me just say it. Okay, so anyway, for those of you who know your basic history, 41 is when the U.S. started in on the Pacific War. The Japanese call it the Greater East Asian War. We here call it World War II. But that's when psychiatry as a field began to burgeon. It grew. They're already planning for the post-war new world order. Who's they? I already mentioned them, the bankers, the bloodlines, the Vatican. They knew that they were going to survive the conflagration of global warfare intact. So they're all about planning. So psychiatry was going to be the linchpin of this global mind control. I hate to use that phrase, as you know, but I'll use it just for the sake of convenience. So the timing is not accidental. And this by now has been absorbed into the field, into the profession, to the point with your average psychiatrist of today, he or she will not even know who Hervey Cleckley is. It's part of the DNA. How do I know? Because I've read many articles saying, oh, remember Hervey Cleckley, like he was an ancient memory. He's been absorbed, right? Colin Ross has not been absorbed, and we're going to keep both of these gentlemen's ideas alive and vital for the coming battle, right? Now, prior to the intervention of Dr. Cleckley, because I'll tell you, this is an incredibly well-written book. In another life, Dr. Cleckley would have made an incredibly talented writer of fiction. Not in the sense that these are fabrications, but I'm talking about his flair, his understanding, his appreciation of literary aesthetics. And by that, I mean literary aesthetics. By that, I mean using literature, fiction, novels, poetry, music, lyrics as a means to explore the human soul, the psyche, the emotions, the affective states. That's what literature does. It moves us or it doesn't. It makes us think or it doesn't. It can inspire social movements. It could force otherwise normal people, after playing a few hours of a Gothic themed video game, to completely change his demeanor, his outward presentation to the world. He starts wearing the black fingernail polish and the women the dark lipstick, putting the dramatic eyeliner on there and bangs, and start hooking up with each other online now. It's a lot easier for what Ramsey has identified as a global death cult, which is manifesting itself in such pathologies as the so-called smiley face killers. That's what literature does. And he was a literary man. He had literary sensibilities. And in my reading of Hervey Cleckley, I place him in the grand tradition of Southern Gothic literature. I put him up there with Carson McCullers. The Heart is the Lonely Hunter. 1940. It was published in 1941 as well. He was probably reading her short stories in Maclean's or the magazines that were flourishing back in the pre-internet times. He's a medical doctor. I'm sure he could afford to buy books, first editions. This is before paperbacks were even a thing. Only people of means could afford books because they're only published in hardback. So he was reading literature, the good stuff. He was reading his William Faulkner. He's very much a Southern Gothic. Before that, I'm sure Dr. Cleckley was reading his Edgar Allan Poe. This is all part of mainstream by now American culture. And it's manifested itself to the point of trivia. But I'm saying, do not be deceived. It's not trivial. It's significant. It's meaningful. And it's meant to destroy. The first iteration of Gothic literature in Europe came out of the conflict between Roman Catholicism, the Roman Church, and the Protestant Reformation. That's when you first had signs of Gothic literature, Anne Radcliffe and the Castle of Otranto. One of the guys later became prime minister. What's his name? I can't remember him offhand. Even people like Walter Scott would be part of this tradition, which we call Gothic. Right? That's a separate talk. I'm not going to go into it. I'm not prepared to just go offhand and talk. But there's something distinctively American about this psychopathy that we're seeing today, and I'm calling it Gothic. And it's embedded in the universities. What is the primary architectural style that all the expectant movers and shakers of American society and culture and economy bow down to when they set foot on these elite campuses? The style's called collegiate Gothic. They're already sending signals to you. You are being initiated into this Gothic worldview run by the Knights Templar, and you are slowly going to be initiated in a step-by-step process that will result in the baccalaureate degree, where you will put on the mortar hat and your gown, the cap and gown. And then you were elevated to the higher and higher degrees. That's my world too. But I'll tell you, most people who are my peers, my colleagues, they're oblivious to that. To them, they're just like in the civil service. They don't understand the metaphysics of their own organization. Therefore, they're very easy to control. They think they're just doing scholarship and doing some teaching and doing a little bit of community service, but they don't know that they're serving a larger purpose within the empire. I call them the servitors of empire. Okay, let's proceed because I'm way behind now. Right. So Cleckley helped to make psychology and psychiatry respectable professions by now. I don't know what the percentage, the numbers of psychologists and psychiatrists and therapists, they're all over the place. And they all exert, each of them, far more authority and influence that they are due. Think of Dr. Grande, Dr. Todd, is it Todd Grande? Believe me, I like his show. I think it's funnier than hell. But there are hundreds of thousands of people who watch him regularly. I don't know what's going on in their minds. Do they think that it's really what he's spouting has any connection to the events or the peoples that he's supposedly analyzing? It's quite alarming to me. Right? Before Cleckley, even in early television, all the psychologists, psychiatrists, they'd always be parodied by using a German accent, right? Sid Caesar on your show or Milton Berle. Whenever there was a shrink on, you would always be Dr. Klaus, you'd be Dr. Ruth. Like remember Dr. Ruth Westheimer? There's another American quack who goes by her first name, Dr. Ruth, Dr. Oz, Dr. Drew, and don't forget Dr. Joseph, as in Dr. Joseph Mengele. No, he never did have his TV show, but if he had immigrated to the United States with the rest of the paper clippers, I'm sure someone at CBS would have given his own TV show, the Dr. Joseph Mengele Comedy Hour, right? I think it would have had vast commercial potential, bigger than Ed Sullivan. Okay, I want you to find this book for yourself. You can find it online for free. Try to get the most recent edition. It's updated, and I think it's a masterpiece in clinical observation. Not just because he's a literary stylist, but I think he's really proficient in understanding the human soul. And I know it's not fashionable to talk about the soul, right? We'd rather talk about the psyche. The soul is gone now because Judaism, Christianity, Islam has been banished. The God of psychiatry rules. Just briefly, while I'm on Cleckley, in this particular work, he talks about, this is all familiar to us now through the popular culture, like in movies such as American Psycho. He talks about, there's a section in this book called The Psychopath is Businessmen. Right? We know about snakes in corporations. We know about corporate psychopathy. There's a guy currently, he's also Canadian. I think a lot of reason why people like Ross and Hare come from Canada is because they're like a Tavistock in the New World. This is part of the Anglo-Canadian mind fuck, right? Ewan Cameron is Canadian, and a lot of that migrated to the US, right? So psychopath is businessman, psychopath is man of the world, psychopath is gentleman. That's the mask of Santa. All these people look sane. But again, people in the literary world have been writing about this, gosh, since the Bible even, right? But more recently, people like an author who I've been really super fascinated with over the past few years, Patricia Highsmith. She was also lesbian, by the way. Maybe that had something to do with her apartness from the larger society. But she wrote The Talented Mr. Ripley. And who's the Mr.? He's the guy that wears the mask of sanity in all different types of circumstances, and he gets away with it. Just like Joe Biden got away with it for decades. Bill Clinton got away with it. Hillary Clinton got away with it. Donald Trump is getting away with it. They wear the mask of sanity. This is Cleckley writing back in 1941. What an incredible literary insight that was echoed by a number of his generational peers, including Carson McCullers, who was also a mess. I think she was lesbian. She was alcoholic and a druggie. She was worse off than her friend Truman Capote, who was a gay literary guy who, as I told you before, managed to infiltrate the upper crust in New York City and write about what he called his swans, like Gloria Vanderbilt and Pamela Harriman and all the doyens of society and politics at the time. And he was cast out for it. He was an innovator. Read your Truman Capote. He's definitely within the Southern Gothic tradition, I would say. Truman Capote. He's another name that's being forgotten and should not be. Don't let the YouTube pop-up pundits drive these incredible talents into the background as they continue to plagiarize these characters. So for our purposes, Dr. Cleckley also has a section on, these are case studies of people that he's observed in clinical situations. The psychopath as scientist. Yes. When you read that section of this book, The Mask of Sanity, you're thinking about the Fauci virus. You're thinking about all those characters like Robert Malone wearing the lab outfits, who are getting away with incredible crimes against humanity because they are scientists. She blinded me with science. Remember Thomas Dolby? A really good song, by the way. And there's psychopath as physician. Yes. How many cases do we read? And I have a whole catalog of them, of physicians who are engaged in all kinds of creepy sexual deviant activity with their patients, or those of them who are children in their community, and all kinds of weird stuff. They're not the norm, but there seem to be quite a lot of them running around. These are trusted individuals. And here, to his credit, Dr. Cleckley saves the best for last. He has a section on the psychopath as psychiatrist. I think Dr. Cleckley was giving us a hint that even himself, this authority, this worldwide prominent expert in the popular media, which he shot to the top because of his book and movie, The Three Faces of Eve, and he profited enormously financially. He was on TV. He was featured in magazines. That even the great Dr. Cleckley is telling us that he might be part psychopath. So anyway, that's what awaits you if you want to read this book. It's fascinating stuff. He's up there with Jane Austen, I think, because his books, like Jane Austen's, it's full of gossip. It's like Tennessee Williams. It's like a play. It's like Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, A Streetcar Named Desire. It's all about a bunch of Southern gossip and all infidelities and impotent men, played by Marlon Brando, who can't satisfy the sex goddess Elizabeth Taylor. And it's all about coquetry and cuckoldry and bastardy. That's also William Faulkner. But he writes about that. I mean, he could have been a resident in rural Georgia of Yakanapatna County. Isn't that Faulkner's seemingly fictitious universe, his world? He was a strange bird himself. He was known locally, William Faulkner. He was from a family that kind of, sort of like a Edgar Allan Poe type family, where they were once on the top and they were gradually going down the social ladder through insanity and drunkenness and gambling and incest. And it's like HG or Lovecraft, right? Not H.G. Wells, but all these decaying houses and families. It's a V.C. Andrews. I mean, you see the pattern here? Cleckley was on top of it, but he was coding this in the form of psychiatric case studies. All right. I'm kind of running out of time, so I wanted to show you some videos. I might have to make a part 2 out of this. Let's see a little bit of Dr. Hervey Cleckley in action. This is a video that's made by Colin Ross, who is an expert on Cleckley.
In its 260-year history, the Garden City, Augusta, Georgia, has produced many individuals of great accomplishment and distinction, from a president of our country to a Supreme Court justice, from military heroes to astronauts, artists, and authors. Among these extraordinary people stands a humble man who distinguished himself in so many fields that he deserves special recognition. His legacy needs to be preserved. His name was Hervey Milton Cleckley. He lived in Augusta for much of the 20th century. A man of diverse talents, a man for all seasons. Born at 502 Green Street in downtown Augusta in 1903, Hervey Cleckley grew up in a small, close-knit family. His father was a well-respected dentist, while his mother was a homemaker who took care of the young family. His sister Connor was 8 years younger than Hervey.
Okay, you can watch that on yourself. You can find it on TubeView. It's fine for archiving material like this. But by the way, wasn't James Brown from Augusta, GA? Of course, he was living in the Negro section of Augusta. But because we're talking basically about middle-class white people, women that were being treated in these clinics. So make, control for that particular bias, social class bias, just like Freud himself. He was mainly treating upper middle class, petit bourgeois Jewish women in the Vienna. That was his database that he was generalizing about humanity as a whole. Right? Maybe we ghetto people aren't screwed up like these incestuous Southern Gothic characters memorialized in the Mask of Sanity. We have a separate set of problems. I don't know. But anyway, let's continue with the a little bit of a taste of the film 1957. I was just a youngin'. I think I was even too young to sit up and watch it on TV. 1950s, The Three Faces of Eve, as I mentioned before. Here's the trailer. Now, for those of you watching on replay, it might be blacked out because of a copyright issue. But for those of you who are in the live stream, congratulations. We get to see not only Johnson himself introduce the film, Three Faces. This is what made psychiatry what it is today. Normalized, respectful, and hegemonic.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have entered a soundstage at 20th Century Fox Studio for a visit with Nunnally Johnson, writer, producer, and director who gave you How to Marry a Millionaire, and the man in the gray flannel suit. Mr. Johnson is directing the exciting young star Joanne Woodward, David Wayne, and Lee J. Cobb in The Three Faces of Eve.
There are three characters in Three Faces of Eve who occupy one body, female. This female is married. This is a true story of the most completely documented case of multiple personality in the history of medicine. The book from which this account was taken, also called The Three Faces of Eve, is the Reader's Digest Book Club Choice.
Maybe he wants to get Bonnie away from me.
You mean by divorce?
No, sir, maybe not that, but if he could make me believe I'm losing my mind.
Is that what you think he's trying to do?
Well, I don't know what else it could be the way he tells it. Am I?
She is a bit livelier then as the second of the personalities. Eve Black, a girl who loved nothing better than a few hookers of gin and a romp with a stranger.
Don't you want to give me one?
Well, I never seen you take a drink before.
Honey, there are a lot of things you never seen me do before. That's no sign I don't do. Oh, thrill me. Let your kisses thrill me.
I'm going to have to watch it again, especially that music scene. I don't know if that's Joanne Woodward actually singing, but I forgot about that scene. It was a long time ago since I last saw it on a rerun, right? But you get an idea of what the mass public, America, was being exposed to, blanketed coast to coast from the time of that movie all the way for the next decade and a half or so, when this movie was being replayed over and over again. And not coincidentally, psychiatric problems started to get more and more prevalent and intense, up to the point where recently we have psychopathy as entertainment for fun and profit. Serial killers are all the rage. Smiley face killers, yeah, let's do it. Okay, let's move on to Dr. Colin Ross. I thought it would be helpful for you to see him in action. He has a number of interviews on file for TubeU, but this is Dr. Ross. He's an expert on DID, dissociative identity disorder, as well as ritual abuse, which we'll get to in a moment, by the way. Don't tune out, because we're going to end with another famous example of satanic ritual abuse. That is the 1960s folk singer and icon, Joan Baez, who most likely herself was a victim of childhood sexual abuse and satanic ritual abuse. Hang on, we'll get to that in a moment. But here's Dr. Ross, just a minute or so, talking about DID.
Introduction, I'll tell you quickly what I'm going to go over. And it's divided into 3 sections. So I got 3 sets of slides, and we'll take a break between each of those sections. And we're finishing at 9 or 9:15? 9:15, it's a little loose. We could go later if need be. 11:15, 12. I'm a psychiatrist, born in Canada, grew up in Canada, went to medical school in Canada from 77 to 81, did my psychiatry training in Canada from 81 to 85. Then I was an academic psychiatrist in Canada 85 to 91. And then in 91, I moved to Dallas, where I've been since, running a hospital-based trauma program. In 98, we opened a trauma program here at Forestview. And then in 2000, I kind of inherited a pre-existing trauma program at a hospital in LA. And in Dallas, I'm now at my 3rd hospital. So the first hospital I was at is closed. That corporation went out of business. Second hospital I was at closed temporarily, so we moved to a sister hospital in the Dallas area. So basically I help with oversight, overview, educating the staff, consulting to the staff. I do lots of writing, lots of talking, and I do in Dallas 3 groups a week in person. Here in Michigan, I do 2 groups a week by video conference. I come up once a month for 2 days.
And that's a fairly recent video of Dr. Raj. You can see he has a very, very busy professional schedule. I don't know how he does it. He's, in addition to his speaking and his clinical work and the practices that he maintains, he, as I mentioned, is a prolific author, especially when he sticks to the psychiatric. And he's tried some literary material, and it didn't come out very well. And that's usually the case, but highly recommended. Let me very quickly explain what Ross has stated about Cleckley and this guy named Dr. Figpen. Right. His name was Dr. Corbett Figpen. Figpen and Cleckley were colleagues in medicine. I think it was Cleckley was a senior person who recruited Thigpen into the practice, and they became professional partners. But where it concerns the three faces of Eve is that they found this woman, right? They found her as a patient, and they decided to exploit her. I think it was Thigpen more so than Cleckley. Her name was Chris Costner Sizemore, right? She was a real person. She's played by Joanne Woodward in the film, right? And they managed to convince her to sell away her rights to the royalties and the film and the book. They appeared in the same year. First came the book, 57, and then came the film, 57. And Chris Sizemore received only $3 American, right? And it was Doctors Cleckley and especially Dr. Thigpen who ran away with the lion's share. And Dr. Ross is really good in trying to forensically account for where the money and royalties went and how much it'll be worth in today's dollar amounts. And it's over $1 million that she was cheated out of, right? Not only that, okay, that's the one thing. Chris Sizemore was cheated out of the money, but according to Colin Ross, she was also a victim of a medical, I won't say malpractice. Let me read the summary of opinion from this book here. It says, in my opinion, it is my opinion that in reasonable and medical probability, Corbett Thigpen, MD, fell below the standard of care in his treatment of Chris Costner Sizemore. He claimed that she was cured of her multiple personality when she was not. He entered into a multi-track relationship with her that included roles as doctor-patient, writer-agent, producer, film subject, friend, and he was even the godfather to her son. So you would call that a conflict of interest. And it's an egregious example of how some of these professionals have exploited their test subjects or their patients. Some of you might be more familiar with the case of Dr. Eugene Landy. He was a PhD, not an MD, but he went by Dr. Eugene Landy. His relationship, professional and personal and business, with none other than the Beach Boys, Brian Wilson. An incredible story. There should be a movie about the Eugene Landy, Brian Wilson story. He was even getting royalties from some of these bits of music that he claimed to have co-authorship with, or co-composer credits with. He lived with Brian Wilson almost 24. You know the story better than I do, probably. So it does happen. And there are examples of this is the case with Dr. Thigpen and the fictional Eve. She was ripped off. There are other examples. I can't remember offhand. I gave a talk about her, a couple of years ago. She was a person. She was also a mental health, quote unquote, patient. And she was being treated by this woman at, I think, out of Columbia University, who also exploited her to advance her career and to reap financial rewards for this. So if you are a person who is going to go undergo treatment, be careful of what you're signing off on. If your story is really fascinating, write it yourself and publish it yourself. Don't bring other people in to do the job. Only you can report it and capture it in the way that's going to be most useful to other people, right? Don't create an agent when there is none to be had. Okay, so the final part, running out of time, we already know about the serial killer phenomenon, the fad, fun and profit. I was listening to a podcast that says that the public fascination with the serial killer phenomenon is itself a form of cult activity. I don't know if I could label it in such a fashion. Even if I did call it a cult, what does that really mean, right? The point is that we're dealing with an actually existing phenomenon of mass entrancement or enchantment with psychopathy. So I will leave you with one area that I have zero competence in understanding or experience with. And this is a plea to younger people who are watching this cast or who you will share it with, your son, your daughter, who grew up with video games in particular, so that they can take their experience having been socialized by video games, just like I was with television and movies, and help us, the wider public, to understand how the entire video game universe and world making, in particular, I'm interested in the Gothic subculture, has been promoted in order to keep this worldwide psychopathic drift into play. The video games, not just when I say games, that's kind of a misnomer. There's Linden Labs that does Second Life. Second Life is far than a game. But in the literature, academic or otherwise, they're sometimes called role-playing games, RPG. Right? So it's become a common practice to adopt a role and to play in it. Right? You can be the three faces of Eve multiplied any number of times. You too can play a role. It's become normalized role play. It's become fashionable, trendy, and perhaps even institutionalized. When you start seeing children coming to school in doggy masks, in animal outfits and costumes, they're called furries. Oh, excuse me, that's already happened in some places, right? Or wearing GIMP masks in college and university. Right. I first started seeing them about, 15 years ago. Women in particular coming up all tatted up and just all pierced up. They called it body modification. This is all part of the PSYOP as well. I even had a student who ran one of those business establishments who he would tattoo and do piercings on. And he knew the names of the identities, the address, all the personal information of all these prominent people in the Bay Area who were getting all these secret body modifications. That's a complete compromised situation. It's not just videotaping people like they did at the freak-offs, but these people who run the tattoo parlors are also providing intelligence and blackmailable material for people that need to compromise others in order to maintain control. So the whole Gothic subculture started to appear. It's big in video games. I know nothing about it. I don't pretend to know anything about it. Ask your son. It's mostly a guy thing. Ask your sons if they're into it, if they're familiar with this game, and quiz them. Just ask them out of curiosity, what is the Gothic subculture in video game? What is it about? And if it piques their interest, they might be able to write a paper about it at the college and university. And I'm thinking about within 10, 20 years, there will be doctoral dissertations written about Gothism and the Gothic subculture, especially where it pertains to video games. Just like it took me going through a whole professionalization process to come to grips to my childhood indoctrination to television sitcoms and Cold War television propaganda. Right. So I'm trying to leave it to the next generation to pick up the baton. Right. Here's what I mean by the games with a Gothic theme.
Role-playing game developed by the German-based Piranhabytes.
Sorry about that.
years, it's become a cult classic among RPG fans, especially in Eastern Europe. The game was quite ahead of its time and served as a massive point of inspiration for the Witcher series by CD Projekt Red. Since the Witcher games are some of my favorite RPGs of all time, I was curious to see if I could still get something worthwhile out of this 23-year-old game. And after 25 hours of gameplay, I bring you my 2024 review of Gothic from a first-time player's perspective. Since the game is from 2001, we need to download some fan-made patches to get the game.
Okay, you can watch, you get an idea. You can watch this on your own. You know, if I was going to recruit a stay-behind network of terrorists, let's say send them down to LA and to riot and create political instability, I would get all the data that's being harvested by these people who are online playing these RPGs. I'd find out all these people, I'd profile them, and use that as a sort of a screening tool, recruitment tool. And you could find this guy, you know, visit them, fill them full of psychotropic drugs, put them in through a mind control program, an after-school enrichment program, because you're testing them all the way. And you have a Thomas Crook. You have a Manchurian candidate at your disposal. And I'm sure all the neo-Nazis that are appearing in Central Europe are big game heads. I'm not sure. I don't have any evidence. That's for you, the younger generation of researchers, to figure it out. I'm just putting out the speculation. All right. So I promised you to conclude with someone from my generation who I looked up to, Joan Baez. I thought she was and is the most beautiful woman in popular music, American popular music. All right, that's Joan Baez. And I'm not the only person that believed that. To us, we would follow her anywhere. She was older than me, of course, but I'm a young kid looking up at her. Wow, Joan Baez. She's singing about peace, civil rights, about humanity. This is what I was brought into in the 60s and 70s, and I followed her career all the way up through her Diamonds and Rust album, which is really good. She wrote that, by the way, Diamonds and Rust. Dylan makes a appearance in it. He's kind of mentioned in passing. It's also about her ex-husband, David Harris, who was thrown into prison for draft resistance during the height of the Vietnam War. Yes, she was anti-Vietnam War. She was not going to promote the war mission. This is Joan Baez. But after going to a talk at an Episcopalian church a few years back, I think I was still at UC Davis at the time, I was on my way out because I was teaching all this stuff, and I was telling all my students, hey, you're in the belly of the beast. You're being recruited for this machine here, right here and now. And that got back to all the snitches in the university, so they got rid of me. But I was still there at the time, and I went to go see a talk by a couple who have written extensively. Their names slip my mind right now. I have the book. It's in my library. I have to find it. But it was there. The important point is that it was there that I learned about this song that Joan Baez wrote. It's called Play Me Backwards. So I found the video online. I'm going to share it with you briefly, just the introduction part. And I also have the album and listened to it. So I'm very much interested in confirming whether or not Joan Baez was indeed sexually abused as a child. And there's some hints that it might have been her father who was engaged. It's kind of, there are hints in the song. This is what literary work does. It drops a lot of hints. It's kind of like our political unconsciousness transposed into lyrical form and the beautiful melodies and harmonies, if it's a good piece of music or literature or poetry or lyrics. but there's some hints in it. So go to TubeU and listen to the lyrics closely. It's called Play Me Backwards, Joan Baez. But this particular appearance is in San Francisco at a local independent record shop where she's introducing this notion of child abuse and satanic ritual abuse. And the reason why I'm leaving on this note is because there's a whole range of experts who would be arrayed meaning standing against someone like a Colin Ross who talks about satanic abuse. And they're supposedly experts on it. I was reading the article about a person who was at UC Davis. I'm sure she and her husband knew all about me and were warning the administration that Professor Hamamoto is destabilizing the ugly truth about the university. Her name was Professor Gail S. Goodman, and her husband was Philip Shaver in the psychology department, which was the home department of Stan Sue and Nolan Zane, who was trying to turn out yellow students and putting them to the mental health. These are all people who claimed that I was paranoid and did everything they could in their professional ability within the university to push me out. So I'm speaking from a position of existential struggle with the forces of evil in my own place of work, within my own profession. All right. So anyway, let's go back to Joan Baez, who manages to bring all these. Imagine what her life must have been. By the way, her father, who I suspect was the mustached, masked Mexican man, Baez, Dr. PhD, Alberto Baez. And he was at Stanford. He quit Stanford, but he was working in the military war machine. Right? That's how Baez got into the Bay Area. That's how she still lives in the Bay Area. And she had a sojourn in Cambridge, Massachusetts. She's been around. She seems kind of like one of these music industry altars that have been moved from place to place. That's how I'm beginning to reevaluate the career of one Joan Baez. So here, listen to it carefully. Go on TubeU and watch it over again. Put this into your memory.
This is a title song from the album. It's called Play Me Backwards, and it has different meanings. It has a pun on the expression play me backwards, meaning you've never had to play me backwards to figure out what I was hitting you over the head with at any given point in my socio-political history. It's also taken from the concept, which I never proved to myself, but that if you play certain heavy metal records backwards, you get a satanic message. The song is about child abuse, it's about children's rights, it's about kids who didn't have them in the first place or had them taken away. And the second verse is pretty ferocious. It's about ritualized satanic abuse. You don't have to play me backwards to get.
Yes, I'll let you watch this on your own. It's a very dark and heavy theme that Joan Baez, true to her artistic sense of self, is coming to grips with this history, this personal history, as recently as, that performance was 1991. The album, I think, came a little bit later. So I'm playing this just to remind the public of this plague that is visited upon the land, right? And also it's an indictment of these characters like Gail S. Goodman, her colleague in the history department as well, who I mentioned from time to time, Phil Shaver. Isao Fujimoto was in my department. He's a snitch. He's a rat. He's dead now, but he was reporting everything that I was doing to his handlers, right? This is how they operate. The Epstein operation is just one of the more obvious deals. You're being surveilled at work right now. You don't even know it. And I'm not talking about electronic surveillance. I'm talking about human rats. Right? In any workplace, there's someone that's going to try to get over on you. At the same time, by the way, they're sabotaging themselves. That's the part that they don't realize, that they eventually are going to get the big red hot poker up the butt because of their actions, right? So my one final comment, and I'll take this up later when I deal with the smiley face killers and this global psychopathy murder ring in operation that seems to have gone worldwide now. I think the biggest omission is that these people are not adequately addressing the occult world, the metaphysics of evil. Colin Ross still views himself as a scientist, as a medical scientist. I'm sure Cleckley did as well, even though he could not repress a lot of it. It was coming through. His Southern Gothic sensibility was coming through when writing his case studies. Just like Truman Capote could not repress what he knew about his own life, right, as he was growing up in the South as well as New York City amongst the glitterati. But it's the occultic world, the Crowleyan world that I alluded to earlier, that's going to help us understand this takeover, political, economic, social, cultural takeover of the United States of America, Canada, Mexico, Europe, and the rest of the world. This is what we're grappling with right here. And I think we can figure it out by looking at the literature, looking at the examples, and being honest with ourselves. I don't necessarily enjoy reading this literature, or I don't look forward to sitting down and watching the Scream franchise with those masks characters, which a lot of people today are now emulating. These Gothic characters are wearing these masks. These people who are now part of the global death cult wear the masks that were popularized in the film franchise. Whom himself was inspired, as I mentioned in a previous talk, about ritual killings that were taking place in Florida, Gainesville, the Gainesville Ripper, Danny Rolling, or Ted Bundy, who wound up in Florida, right? Wherever there's these powerful synchrotrons, electronic mind control devices, that's where you're going to have a high incidence of these people who are being controlled. I mentioned that last week for those of you who are not listening, because that's part of the critique as well. All right, I hope you'll rejoin me back this coming Sunday, God willing. I'm on an incredible journey that I'm glad to share with you, with the hopes that you'll take some of this information and build the necessary self-consciousness, self-awareness, and courage to turn back the evil. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I'll see you next week, God willing. Peace.